He was a highly arrogant, multi-billionaire tech mogul who highly maliciously lied completely to his heavily pregnant wife, highly toxically claiming he had a highly urgent corporate meeting entirely in massive Valencia, entirely, while he highly secretly flew his highly expensive private jet directly to highly exclusive Malaga, entirely for a highly romantic tropical getaway, completely with his 26-year-old elite assistant. He genuinely, toxically, thought his highly elaborate toxic lies were completely, utterly flawless. He possessed absolutely zero microscopic idea that exactly while he was highly peacefully tanning perfectly by a highly exclusive infinity pool, his highly devoted wife was completely, violently discovering his highly damning public Instagram posts entirely, while she was highly agonizingly actively suffering completely through the highly excruciating, terrifying hours entirely of premature labor. And exactly when he highly arrogantly returns completely home, highly pathetically expecting entirely to highly easily, successfully play the highly devoted, perfect husband, he doesn't confidently step completely off his highly expensive jet directly into the highly welcoming, soft arms entirely of his loving wife. He confidently steps completely off directly into a highly catastrophic, lethal ambush, highly meticulously orchestrated, completely by the absolute most highly terrifying, ruthless divorce lawyer entirely in the massive country. Welcome back to the channel, my beautiful family. If you fiercely believe that absolute karma always successfully collects its highly massive debts, and you absolutely love highly explosive stories of ultimate revenge and pure resilience, you absolutely must hear this incredible story. Please smash that like button to strongly support our content, subscribe to our channel, and let me know exactly what you would do if your partner went on a secret vacation while you were giving birth down in the comments below. Let's get directly into The Price of Paradise. Part 1. The Toxic Illusion of Paradise. The highly heavy, oppressive silence entirely. In the highly massive luxury penthouse, perfectly on highly exclusive Park Avenue, was absolutely something completely, terrifyingly alive. It highly heavily breathed the highly filtered, completely sterile air and highly heavily settled, completely upon the highly vast, expensive expanses entirely of imported Carrara marble and highly polished chrome, exactly like a highly fine, toxic layer entirely of thick dust. Isabella Sterling. At exactly 9 agonizing months and exactly 6 highly heavy days, heavily pregnant, physically felt the highly heavy silence exactly like a massive, crushing physical weight perfectly on her fragile chest, from her highly comfortable seat entirely on a highly exclusive, bespoke designer sofa. She could highly clearly, vividly see the absolute entirety entirely of massive Central Park, beautifully unfolding completely beneath a highly vibrant, beautiful green tapestry, completely against the highly cold, gray steel entirely of the massive city. It was officially a highly breathtaking view that had highly easily cost an absolute, massive fortune. A highly exclusive view that was highly officially supposed entirely to explicitly mean that she highly successfully possessed absolutely everything. But exactly today, it absolutely only highly aggressively actively made her profoundly feel incredibly small and completely, utterly isolated. A highly fragile, pathetic porcelain doll entirely in a highly massive, life-sized luxury dollhouse. Her highly ambitious husband, Alexander Vance, was highly frantically actively packing his expensive bags. He smoothly moved completely through their highly cavernous, massive bedroom, completely with the exact same highly predatory, highly energetic, absolute efficiency that he highly ruthlessly applied entirely to his highly hostile corporate acquisitions. At exactly his highly arrogant age, Alexander was an absolute terrifying titan entirely of the highly elite tech industry. The highly celebrated, famous CEO entirely of VanceTech flawlessly possessed a sharp jaw that visually looked exactly as if it were highly brutally carved, completely from solid granite. Piercing eyes, exactly the highly specific color, entirely of a highly stormy, massive sea. And a highly toxic, potent charisma, so incredibly massive that it could highly easily completely bend absolute reality. He had highly successfully actively convinced the absolute entire massive world that his highly advanced data mining software was completely entirely about highly pure connectivity, absolutely not highly illegal, toxic surveillance. And he had highly successfully actively convinced Isabella that his highly frequent, highly urgent last-minute corporate business trips were an absolute, highly necessary, massive sacrifice entirely for the highly massive empire they were beautifully building. "It is absolutely just highly boring, Boston Bella," his deep voice loudly echoed incredibly slightly, completely, from the massive bedroom. He confidently stepped completely out, highly aggressively buckling a highly expensive Patek Philippe watch perfectly onto his strong wrist. He flawlessly wore a highly bespoke Tom Ford suit that highly likely easily cost significantly more than her absolute first expensive car. One absolute last highly important handshake entirely for the highly massive Helios corporate deal. "I will absolutely confidently return completely before you can highly possibly, absolutely, even highly tragically miss me." Isabella highly gently passed a soft hand perfectly over the highly tense, massive sphere entirely of her heavy belly, exactly where her innocent son was highly actively performing a highly massive series entirely of highly aggressive, painful somersaults. The elite doctor explicitly said that it could highly possibly absolutely be entirely at absolutely any highly specific moment, Alexander. He highly specifically, explicitly told you absolutely not entirely to highly actively travel completely anymore. He confidently crossed the massive living room and smoothly knelt completely down perfectly before her, his highly expensive toxic cologne flawlessly filling the highly heavy space perfectly between them. He highly gently took her soft hand, his strong thumb highly lovingly caressing her delicate knuckles. It was a highly disarming, highly practiced toxic gesture, and "I will absolutely be entirely on the absolute first, highly rapid flight, completely back the absolute second. You physically feel a highly real, painful contraction. My highly expensive private jet is completely on highly active standby. You officially possess my absolute heavy word." His piercing eyes were incredibly sincere. His handsome expression, a highly perfect, flawless mask, entirely of highly pure concern. He was incredibly good. He was so incredibly, highly good. She highly desperately wanted to genuinely believe him. For exactly 5 agonizing years, she had highly lovingly built her beautiful life, highly genuinely believing him. She had absolutely been the highly perfect, flawless wife, highly elegant, incredibly supportive, a highly gracious, beautiful hostess, and a highly quiet, silent partner entirely in his highly relentless, blinding ambition. She had highly pathetically overlooked the highly suspicious late nights, the highly hushed, secret phone calls, the highly faint, toxic aroma entirely of a highly unknown, expensive perfume violently clinging completely to his bespoke shirts. She had highly logically attributed it absolutely, all completely, to the highly massive pressures entirely of his highly elite world. The highly heavy cost entirely of peacefully living, entirely in the highly exclusive stratosphere. She had highly bravely chosen entirely to highly blindly trust him. But the beautiful pregnancy had highly aggressively sharpened her fragile senses, flawlessly honing a highly primal, pure intuition that she absolutely didn't completely know she highly successfully possessed, and entirely in exactly this highly specific moment, exactly that highly primal intuition was violently screaming. "Boston, huh?" she asked, flawlessly maintaining her beautiful tone incredibly light. "With exactly who are you highly actively meeting completely again?" "With Mr. Tanaka," a highly microscopic blink, so incredibly, highly slight, that she would absolutely have highly completely missed it. Exactly 1 agonizing year, completely ago. But absolutely not exactly now. His piercing eyes intensely looked directly at her entirely for a highly microscopic fraction, entirely of a second way. Too incredibly long. It is an absolute, highly pathetic farce. You profoundly know exactly how it absolutely is. He smoothly leaned completely in and highly casually kissed her. A highly brief, incredibly dry brush, entirely of cold lips. Do absolutely not highly actively worry. Isabella, sister, is absolutely already confidently coming completely over. You will absolutely not be completely alone. He confidently stood completely up, highly aggressively grabbing his highly expensive leather carry-on. I will highly urgently call you exactly the absolute second I highly safely land. I fiercely love you. I fiercely love you completely too, she whispered incredibly softly, directly to his highly rapidly retreating broad back. The highly toxic lie violently tasted exactly like highly cold ash, entirely in her dry mouth. The highly heavy door entirely of the luxury penthouse, loudly closed completely, with a highly sharp lick. And the highly oppressive, heavy silence, completely, violently, flooded absolutely everything, completely once again. Isabella safely remained perfectly on the expensive sofa, intensely listening directly to the highly distant hum, entirely of the massive city incredibly far completely below. Boston. The highly massive Helios deal. Absolutely everything actively sounded so incredibly, highly plausible. Alexander was an absolute, undisputed master, entirely of highly plausible deniability. She incredibly slowly pulled her expensive laptop completely from the highly polished side table. The highly cold metal physically felt incredibly freezing, completely against her pale skin. Her soft fingers violently trembled, incredibly slightly. Exactly as she smoothly opened the bright browser. She absolutely wasn't a highly pathetic spy. She absolutely wasn't a highly jealous, toxic wife. She was absolutely just how simply actively running a highly simple verification. She highly rapidly typed the highly specific name entirely of the elite aviation company that Alexander highly exclusively used entirely for his highly expensive private jet. A highly quick, simple search entirely of highly specific tail numbers. A highly clever trick that her highly investigative journalist sister had highly successfully taught her. Flawlessly yielded a highly official flight record, a highly expensive private jet officially owned completely by VanceTech, had highly officially filed a highly strict flight plan, exactly 2 agonizing hours, completely prior. Absolutely not highly boring Boston. Cabo San Lucas. Absolutely all the heavy air, completely, violently abandoned her burning lungs, entirely in a highly painful, sharp exhalation. Cabo. The highly explosive word violently evoked highly vivid images entirely of highly romantic, tropical getaways, of highly passionate newlyweds and highly secret lovers, of highly sparkling turquoise water and highly pristine white sandy beaches. It was the completely, absolute opposite entirely of a highly boring corporate boardroom entirely in freezing Boston. Her brilliant mind frantically raced, highly desperately attempting to miraculously find a highly logical explanation, a highly valid reason, a highly sudden layover, a highly urgent last-minute venue change. But the highly toxic lie had absolutely been so incredibly highly specific. Mr. Tanaka, the massive board, right entirely in exactly that highly specific moment. A highly sharp, excruciatingly stabbing absolute pain, completely, violently shot completely through her highly fragile lower back, violently wrapping completely around her massive abdomen, exactly like a highly tight band, entirely of highly burning hot steel. She violently gasped, her soft hand violently flying directly to her massive belly. It was completely, utterly different. Completely from the highly dull Braxton Hicks contractions, completely to which she had highly tragically become completely accustomed. This was a highly deep, completely primal, massive contraction that completely, violently robbed her entirely of her heavy breath and highly aggressively actively made the highly breathtaking billion-dollar massive view violently swim completely before her piercing eyes. Absolutely. Another exactly one violently followed, exactly a highly few short minutes, significantly later. Significantly, infinitely stronger. This highly specific time, her highly fragile water had absolutely not, completely, violently, broken. But she profoundly knew. This was officially IT. She highly frantically, blindly searched entirely for her expensive phone. Her soft fingers, incredibly slippery, completely with highly freezing, cold sweat. Her absolute first, highly primal instinct was entirely to highly urgently call Alexander, to highly desperately explicitly tell him to completely, violently turn the highly expensive plane completely around. That his biological son was highly actively arriving, but she completely stopped, her soft thumb highly dangerously hovering perfectly over his highly arrogant name. He had highly maliciously lied completely to her, so incredibly, highly casually, so incredibly, highly completely. If she highly urgently called him right exactly now, exactly what would she highly catastrophically encounter? Significantly more highly toxic lies. He would highly pathetically pretend entirely to absolutely be entirely in a highly boring meeting, entirely in freezing Boston, entirely, while the highly relaxing sound entirely of highly tropical ocean waves highly loudly echoed completely in the highly distant background. The highly toxic betrayal was a massive pain, significantly, infinitely sharper than the highly excruciating contraction. It was a highly freezing, highly jagged, sharp shard entirely of solid ice, smoothly sliding highly deeply, completely into her fragile heart. Her expensive phone violently vibrated entirely in her soft hand. It was officially her highly loyal younger sister. Chloe. Chloe! Isabella heavily breathed completely with highly massive relief. Hey, Bella. I literally just confidently stepped completely off the highly crowded subway. I am confidently coming completely up, entirely in exactly 5 short minutes. The highly arrogant prince of toxic lies, highly successfully, confidently, Left entirely for his highly fake corporate business meeting? Good. Chloe had absolutely never, ever highly blindly trusted Alexander. She vividly saw him absolutely not exactly as a highly charismatic titan, but exactly as a highly terrifying, narcissistic predator. Isabella had absolutely always highly fiercely defended him. Absolutely always highly toxically accused her loyal sister entirely of actively being way too incredibly highly cynical. But exactly now, he is completely gone. "Chloe," Isabella stated, her beautiful voice completely, violently breaking. Absolutely another highly excruciating contraction violently hit her, and she absolutely could not highly successfully repress a highly low, agonizing moan. "Bella? What exactly was exactly that? Are you perfectly fine? Is it highly officially time?" "I highly genuinely think exactly so," she violently gasped. "And Chloe, he maliciously lied. He absolutely is not actively going to freezing Boston. He is actively flying directly to highly exclusive Cabo." There was a highly massive moment entirely of highly deafening, dead silence, completely on the absolute other side, entirely of the highly secure line. Then the beautiful voice entirely of Chloe. Completely, violently, stripped entirely of absolutely all her highly usual, light-hearted lightness, confidently came completely through. Incredibly freezing cold and highly hard, exactly like solid steel. "It is perfectly fine, Bella. It is completely fine. Do absolutely not highly actively worry. I am miraculously almost perfectly there. We will highly successfully handle exactly this. Absolutely. First, we will highly urgently, safely take you directly to the massive hospital entirely. So exactly that you can highly successfully have exactly this innocent baby." She violently paused. "Then, we are actively going to completely, violently burn his highly arrogant kingdom completely back directly to the highly cold, freezing ground." Isabella just realized Alexander lied about his trip while she is going into labor. Should she call him and demand he come back, or focus on the baby first? Tell us below. Part 2. The perfect storm. The highly sterile, freezing white walls, entirely of the highly exclusive delivery room, entirely in the highly elite Mount Sinai Hospital, or Kiron Salud, actively seemed to completely, violently close, completely and perfectly on Isabella. Every single highly annoying beep entirely of the highly advanced fetal heart monitor. Every single highly sharp rustle entirely of the highly sterile uniform, entirely of an elite nurse, was completely, violently magnified, completely into a highly deafening, terrifying roar. The highly excruciating contractions confidentially came significantly faster. Exactly now. Highly relentless, massive waves entirely of absolute agony that violently rose and highly violently crashed, ruthlessly leaving her violently gasping and violently trembling completely in their highly destructive wake, and completely through absolutely all entirely of it. Exactly one single, highly toxic thought, highly relentlessly completely repeated, completely without absolutely any highly pathetic end, entirely in her brilliant mind. Cabo, Cabo, Cabo. Chloe was an absolute massive whirlwind entirely of highly controlled, pure fury. She had highly aggressively taken absolute, total command the absolute precise moment she confidently entered the luxury penthouse. Her beautiful face, completely pale, completely with absolute rage, entirely on highly absolute behalf, entirely of her loyal sister. She had highly calmly and highly efficiently packed the highly essential hospital bag, highly carefully helped Isabella safely get directly into the expensive car. And exactly now, highly fiercely mounted absolute guard perfectly by her sterile bed, completely with her expensive phone securely in her soft hand and a highly grim, terrifying expression. "Have you highly desperately attempted to highly urgently call him completely again?" Isabella asked completely with a highly hoarse, broken voice. "Exactly 4 agonizing times," Chloe stated completely, without actively raising her piercing gaze completely from the bright screen. "It highly aggressively goes highly directly, straight directly to highly pathetic voicemail, absolutely every single highly frustrating time. I am incredibly sorry. I absolutely cannot highly possibly safely take your highly urgent call entirely at exactly this highly specific moment." The highly fake, pre-recorded toxic message is miraculously almost exactly as incredibly fake, exactly as he absolutely is. She had absolutely already highly urgently sent him exactly a highly massive dozen highly urgent text messages. "Isabella is actively entirely in highly active labor. We are actively entirely in Mount Sinai. Highly exclusive, room 712. Alexander. Highly urgently call me. It is highly actively happening right exactly now. Where exactly the hell absolutely are you?" Highly deafening silence. Exactly 1 agonizing hour, completely after they highly safely arrived. A highly single, pathetic text message, completely from Alexander, finally highly miraculously arrived. Highly clearly, it was highly officially sent completely from a highly expensive, in-flight Wi-Fi service. Incredibly brief. And completely, utterly impersonal. "I literally just highly safely landed. Highly brutal, exhausting flight. Highly important corporate meetings the absolute entire massive day. I will highly urgently call exactly when I highly possibly can. Highly passionate kisses completely to Bella. I highly genuinely hope she is profoundly feeling perfectly fine." Chloe highly aggressively showed the bright screen completely to Isabella, her sharp jaw violently tense. "He highly arrogantly hopes you are profoundly feeling perfectly fine. Exactly that highly toxic man successfully possesses the highly deep emotional depth entirely of a highly shallow, pathetic puddle." Isabella physically felt a highly brand new, massive wave entirely of severe nausea that successfully possessed absolutely nothing highly massive to actively do, completely with highly active labor. He was highly aggressively doubling completely down completely on the highly toxic lie. He was actively entirely in highly exclusive Cabo, and highly pathetically trending entirely to absolutely see entirely in freezing Boston, actively beginning a highly long, exhausting day entirely of highly boring corporate meetings. The highly casual, toxic informality entirely of the highly massive lie was exactly what truly, genuinely, completely destroyed her. It highly explicitly implied that exactly this absolutely was not his absolute first highly toxic time. He was a highly well-oiled, massive machine entirely of highly toxic deception. "He is actively completely with absolutely someone," Isabella whispered incredibly softly. The highly absolute certainty entirely of exactly it. Highly heavily settling, completely deep, entirely into her fragile bones. "You absolutely do not confidently go directly to highly exclusive, Cabo completely alone, entirely, for a highly secret tropical vacation, exactly when your highly devoted wife is highly actively about to miraculously give highly magical birth. You confidently go completely with absolutely someone. The soft fingers entirely of Chloe violently flew completely across the bright screen, entirely of her expensive phone. Her delicate brow deeply furrowed entirely in highly deep concentration. As a highly brilliant freelance investigative journalist, she flawlessly possessed a highly particular, elite set entirely of highly advanced skills that highly heavily involved, highly expertly navigating the highly murky, toxic depths entirely of highly public social media and highly public records. Who exactly confidently went completely with him? She highly quietly murmured. The highly official flight log absolutely only highly officially mentions him and the highly elite pilots. Perfectly. There are absolutely no completely other highly official passengers completely on the highly official manifest. His highly elite personal assistant, Isabella stated highly suddenly. The highly toxic name violently caught entirely in her dry throat. Evelyn Thorne. Evelyn was exactly 26 young years old. Flawlessly possessed highly sharp, piercing blue eyes. A highly glamorous cloud, entirely of beautiful blonde hair. And a highly massive, blinding ambition, so incredibly, highly blatant, that it was practically a highly toxic second skin. She had highly eagerly aggressively begun entirely advanced tech exactly 3 agonizing years completely ago, and had highly aggressively successfully climbed completely up entirely to miraculously become the highly elite executive assistant entirely of Alexander. His highly fierce gatekeeper, his highly constant dark shadow. Isabella had absolutely always, highly accurately successfully found her incredibly, highly unsettling. The highly specific way she intensely looked directly at Alexander. A highly toxic mixture entirely of highly pure admiration and highly explicit desire. The highly suspicious way she had suddenly highly proudly adopted a highly brand new, significantly more highly expensive designer wardrobe, flawlessly wearing highly expensive designer shoes and heavily carrying highly exclusive designer bags that were completely, infinitely beyond the highly normal salary range, entirely of a highly simple assistant. Absolutely even a highly incredibly well-paid, exactly one. Isabella had highly gently casually mentioned exactly it completely to Alexander exactly once, and he had laughed loudly. I highly generously pay her a highly massive lucrative bonus, Bella. She is officially the absolute best. I highly desperately need her to highly flawlessly project the highly perfect, elite image. Evelyn Thorne, Chloe highly toxically repeated, highly rapidly typing the highly specific name completely into absolutely every single highly advanced search bar she could highly possibly successfully find. Highly public Instagram, absolutely, of course. She highly desperately wants to absolutely be highly publicly seen. She highly rapidly scrolled completely through a highly curated, toxic feed entirely of highly absolute perfection, highly expensive cocktails, perfectly on highly exclusive rooftops, entirely in massive Manhattan, highly exclusive gallery openings, entirely in highly elite neighborhoods, highly luxurious, business class 5 IP lounges all completely over the entire massive world. It was a highly visual, toxic diary entirely of a highly glamorous elite life that she absolutely could not highly possibly successfully afford. And exactly then, Chloe completely, violently stopped. Her heavy breath completely, violently caught. Oh, you absolutely have to fiercely be completely joking. she whispered incredibly softly. Her toxic voice heavily tinged completely with highly lethal venom. She violently flipped the expensive phone completely around. The absolute most highly recent toxic post entirely on the highly public Instagram story, entirely of Evelyn, was a highly short video, highly recently uploaded exactly less than exactly 1 short hour, completely ago. It was a highly short, beautiful panoramic clip, highly illegally taken, completely from a highly exclusive, private infinity pool. The highly sparkling water was of a highly brilliant, bright turquoise, and entirely in the highly distant background. Highly lush, beautiful green hills, beautifully cascaded completely down, completely under a highly beautiful sky. Heavily speckled, completely with bright pink and highly soft orange, entirely of a highly tropical sunrise. It was completely unmistakably, highly iconically. Cabo San Lucas. The highly expensive camera smoothly panned completely from the highly breathtaking view directly to exactly a highly beautiful pair, entirely of highly expensive champagne glasses, safely resting perfectly on the highly wet edge, entirely of the infinity pool. Then, entirely for a highly microscopic fraction, entirely of a highly terrifying second, it smoothly lowered, flawlessly, showing exactly 2 highly distinct pairs entirely of bare feet playfully entirely in the highly sparkling water. Exactly 1 highly delicate pair, completely with highly perfectly manicured, bright red toenails. Highly, clearly, completely belonging completely to Evelyn. The absolute other, significantly larger and highly distinctively, undeniably, masculine, was completely, unmistakably, entirely, of Alexander. Isabella intimately knew his bare feet significantly better than her absolute own. She had highly lovingly, generously given him highly countless, highly relaxing foot massages, completely after his highly long, exhausting corporate days. But it was officially the highly toxic caption that flawlessly delivered exactly this highly absolute, final fatal blow. Exactly 1 single, highly heavy word, heavily dripping completely with highly intimate, toxic complacency. The heavy air entirely in the highly sterile hospital room violently became completely, utterly freezing. Isabella intensely stared directly at the bright screen. The highly damning image entirely of the bare feet entirely of her arrogant husband, highly intimately intertwined, completely with absolutely those, entirely of his highly glamorous assistant, entirely in a highly tropical, massive paradise. Entirely, while she highly pathetically lay, completely, violently, broken, and violently, bleeding entirely in a highly sterile hospital bed, an absolute entire massive ocean completely away. The highly digital, massive world completely, violently, collapsed directly into the highly physical. And the highly toxic betrayal was absolutely no longer a highly pathetic suspicion, but a highly undeniable, completely blatant, absolute fact. A highly choked sound violently escaped completely from her soft lips. A highly raw, deeply wounded, loud scream that was highly equally massive pain and highly equal absolute rage. Isabella violently choked, highly aggressively pushing the expensive phone completely away, exactly as if it had violently burned her pale skin. Exactly that highly pathetic bitch highly maliciously wanted you to vividly see exactly it, Chloe stated, her deep voice highly dangerously, terrifyingly low. Exactly this absolutely is not a highly pathetic mistake, Bella. Exactly this is an absolute, massive declaration, entirely of massive war. She highly proudly posted it perfectly on her highly public story. Absolutely not entirely for her highly close friends. She highly deliberately tagged the highly specific location. She profoundly knew that absolutely someone would highly successfully find it. She is highly aggressively forcing him entirely to violently react. Absolutely another highly excruciating contraction violently tore completely through Isabella. Significantly more highly powerful than absolutely any highly agonizing previous one. She loudly screamed, highly painfully violently arching her fragile back. The highly intense physical pain, a highly welcome, brief distraction, completely from the highly agonizing emotional agony that highly aggressively threatened entirely to completely drown her. An elite nurse frantically rushed completely in, her beautiful face a highly perfect mask entirely of highly professional concern. Absolutely everything is perfectly fine, Isabella. Your highly critical blood pressure is violently rising. I highly desperately need you to highly actively breathe completely with me. The elite nurse highly calmly soothed her, but Isabella literally could not successfully breathe. She was completely, violently, suffocating completely under the massive, crushing weight entirely of absolutely everything. The highly toxic lies. The agonizing years entirely of highly willful ignorance. The highly terrifying image entirely of exactly two highly intimate pairs, entirely of bare feet playfully entirely in the highly sparkling water. Her highly perfect, flawless, gilded cage hadn't absolutely just been a highly pathetic cage. It had absolutely been a highly elaborate stage entirely for a highly toxic play entirely, in which she was officially the highly pathetic, blind fool. Chloe highly fiercely took her soft hand, her strong grip incredibly, highly ferocious. Intensely, listen completely to me, Bella. Completely, utterly forget him. He absolutely does not actively exist. Right exactly now. It is officially, absolutely only you and your innocent son. Exactly that is absolutely all that truly, genuinely matters. You are actively going to highly successfully, violently pass completely through exactly this. And you are actively going to miraculously become a loving mother. And exactly when exactly this is completely over, we will highly aggressively deal completely with him. I fiercely promise you. Isabella intensely looked directly at her loyal sister, at the highly absolute, unbreakable loyalty that brilliantly burned entirely in her piercing eyes. She highly fiercely squeezed her soft hand completely back. A highly massive wave entirely of pure adrenaline, violently piercing completely through the massive pain. Chloe was completely, 100% right. Alexander had highly actively made his highly massive choice. He had highly arrogantly chosen highly exclusive paradise, completely with his highly glamorous mistress completely over the highly magical birth, entirely of his absolute own biological son. Now, it was highly officially her highly anticipated turn entirely to fiercely choose. She could highly pathetically completely crumble, or she could fiercely fight. Highly urgently get me an elite lawyer, Chloe, Isabella stated completely, between highly tightly clenched teeth, exactly as absolutely another highly excruciating contraction aggressively began. Absolutely not! Absolutely just any highly pathetic lawyer. Highly urgently get me the absolute best. Highly urgently get me a highly terrifying shark. The soft lips entirely of Chloe beautifully curled, completely into a highly grim, terrifying smile. I intimately know the highly exact, perfect exactly one. Victoria Hastings. She absolutely doesn't entirely just highly successfully get you a highly brutal divorce. She highly successfully gets you absolute revenge. As the elite doctor confidently entered entirely to highly explicitly tell her that it was highly officially, time entirely, to highly aggressively push. Isabella tightly closed her piercing eyes. She absolutely wasn't entirely just highly aggressively pushing entirely to highly miraculously bring her innocent son completely into the massive world. She was completely, violently expelting the highly pathetic old Isabella, the highly blindly trusting pathetic wife, the highly silent pathetic partner, and entirely in her highly exact place. A completely brand new, terrifying, beautiful woman was miraculously being born. Exactly one, highly violently forged, entirely in the highly lethal fires, entirely of highly toxic betrayal, and highly galvanized completely by the highly righteous, pure fury, entirely of a highly protective mother. Alexander Vance successfully possessed absolutely zero microscopic idea entirely of exactly what was highly actively, violently actively waiting completely for him, and exactly when he confidently returned completely home. Isabella just hired the toughest divorce lawyer in the country while in labor. Do you think Alexander will suspect anything when he gets back? Drop your thoughts below. Part 3. The Awakening. The absolute first, highly pure cry entirely of her highly adorable newborn son, violently pierced completely through the highly deafening cacophony, entirely of highly annoying beeping machines and highly sterile medical jargon. It was officially the absolute, purest, most highly magical sound that Isabella had absolutely ever clearly heard. They highly gently placed him perfectly on her sweaty chest. A highly small, miraculously wriggling reddish miracle. And entirely in exactly that highly magical instant. The absolute entire massive world completely, violently shrank completely down directly to the highly safe space entirely of the highly rapid heartbeats, entirely of her absolute own. And absolutely his. He was perfectly here. He was incredibly real. He was completely hers. She highly lovingly named him Leo, entirely, in highly honorable honor, entirely of her highly loving grandfather. A true man, entirely. Of highly quiet, absolute strength, and completely unshakable, pure integrity. Absolutely everything that his highly arrogant biological father absolutely was not, fiercely holding Leo. Isabella profoundly felt a highly profound, massive shift completely, violently happen completely deep, entirely inside her. The highly crushing disillusionment was absolutely still perfectly there. A highly raw, open wound. But it was absolutely no longer the highly all-consuming, toxic emotion. It had completely, violently coalesced, and was actively being highly rapidly, completely eclipsed, completely by a highly fierce, fiercely protective, pure love. Exactly as highly elemental, exactly as solid granite. This highly small, completely perfect human being, completely, utterly depended, completely, entirely, completely, on her. She was officially his absolute entire massive world. And she would absolutely not highly generously permit him entirely to be highly pathetically raised entirely in the highly dark, toxic shadows, entirely of highly malicious lies and highly toxic deception. Chloe had absolutely been a highly unshakable rock, fiercely holding her soft hand, highly lovingly whispering highly encouraging heavy words, and highly successfully capturing the absolute first, highly precious moments entirely of the beautiful life, entirely of Leo, completely on her expensive phone. Absolutely not entirely for Alexander, but entirely for Isabella. While Isabella highly peacefully rested, and a highly efficient elite nurse highly gently helped her completely with the innocent baby. Chloe confidently stepped completely out directly into the highly quiet hallway. Her soft fingers flawlessly danced completely across the bright screen, entirely of her expensive phone, exactly as she highly urgently made the highly critical call that would completely, violently change absolutely everything. Highly exclusive office entirely of Mrs. Hastings. The highly crisp voice completely on the absolute other side was incredibly crisp and highly professional. My highly official name is officially Chloe Sterling. I highly desperately need to actively speak completely with her, highly urgently. It is officially a highly personal, massive matter entirely on highly absolute behalf, entirely of my loyal sister, Isabella Sterling. Her highly arrogant husband is officially Alexander Vance. The highly explicit mention entirely of exactly those famous names, flawlessly worked exactly like a highly golden key, entirely, in a highly secure lock. There was a highly brief, quiet wait. Then a highly brand new, terrifying voice confidently entered the highly secure line. A highly low, incredibly smooth voice that highly aggressively radiated a highly massive level entirely of absolute authority that was miraculously almost completely unsettling. I am officially Victoria Hastings. Mrs. Hastings, Chloe highly aggressively began. My loyal sister literally just miraculously gave highly magical birth completely to her biological son. Her highly arrogant husband, Alexander Vance, is currently highly actively entirely in highly exclusive Cabo, completely with his highly glamorous executive assistant, a beautiful woman highly explicitly named Evelyn Thorne. He highly toxically, explicitly told my loyal sister that he was entirely in freezing Boston, entirely on highly important corporate business. We officially possess highly undeniable proof entirely of the highly toxic affair and entirely of his highly specific, true location. Isabella highly fiercely wants to highly officially file entirely for highly brutal divorce. There was a highly heavy pause. Chloe could miraculously, almost highly clearly, hear the highly complex gears violently turning entirely in the highly brilliant mind, entirely of the highly legendary elite lawyer, Victoria Hastings. Highly explicitly known entirely in the highly elite, exclusive circles entirely of massive Manhattan, exactly as the shark, had highly successfully handled the absolute most highly contentious, highly high-profile, brutal divorces entirely in the massive city. She was completely brilliant, completely relentless, and incredibly, highly expensive. She absolutely didn't entirely just highly successfully win highly complex cases. She completely eviscerated her highly arrogant opponents. Does he profoundly know that you are highly completely aware entirely of the highly toxic situation? Victoria sharply asked. No, he is completely, utterly, entirely in the highly pathetic dark. He highly arrogantly, genuinely believes that we are absolutely still highly pathetically buying his highly toxic story entirely about freezing Boston. And the highly undeniable proof? Highly time-stamped, highly clear photos completely from the highly public Instagram account, entirely of the highly glamorous Mistress, highly geolocated, entirely in highly exclusive Cabo. A highly official copy, entirely of the highly strict flight log, entirely of the expensive jet. And a highly massive series, entirely of highly toxic text messages, completely from him, highly maliciously lying, entirely about his highly specific whereabouts. Entirely, while my loyal sister was entirely in highly active, excruciating labor. "Excellent," Victoria stated, the highly sharp word violently cutting the highly secure line. "Highly explicitly, tell your loyal sister entirely to highly peacefully rest. Highly explicitly, tell her absolutely not to actively contact him completely under absolutely any highly pathetic circumstances. Absolutely no highly angry text messages. Absolutely no highly tearful phone calls. Highly complete and highly total silence. He absolutely must not clearly hear absolutely anything completely from her." "I am completely clear, highly crystal clear," Chloe firmly replied. "I will highly aggressively have a highly official fee agreement, highly urgently, sent directly to the massive hospital. Entirely in exactly less than exactly 1 short hour. My highly elite team is absolutely already highly actively searching entirely for absolutely every single highly complex financial document highly related completely to Mr. Vance that we can highly possibly successfully get our soft hands completely on. Highly generously, let him highly happily enjoy his highly secret vacation. It will absolutely be his absolute last. Meanwhile, entirely in a highly exclusive $5,000 a night private villa, entirely in the highly luxurious Pedregal Resort, entirely in Cabo. Alexander Vance, highly effectively, was highly happily enjoying. He peacefully floated completely on his broad back, entirely in the highly exclusive infinity pool. Completely with an expensive, highly cold imported beer, heavily sweating entirely in his massive hand. The highly hot tropical sun beautifully warming his pale skin. Evelyn Thorne, flawlessly dressed entirely in a highly skimpy, expensive designer bikini, beautifully swam directly over and highly provocatively wrapped her soft arms completely around his strong neck. "You visually look incredibly tense," she seductively purred, highly passionately kissing his sharp chin. "Are you absolutely still highly deeply thinking entirely about highly exhausting corporate work?" Alexander heavily sighed, highly intimately pulling her significantly closer. "I absolutely just profoundly feel a highly tiny bit, highly guilty. Exactly that is absolutely all. Isabella could highly possibly miraculously give highly magical birth entirely at absolutely any highly specific moment." Evelyn violently rolled her piercing blue eyes. A highly calculated toxic flash entirely of pure annoyance, brilliantly flashing entirely in her piercing blue eyes. "Alexander, we have absolutely already completely talked entirely about exactly this. You highly fiercely deserve exactly this. You have highly aggressively pushed completely yourself directly to the highly absolute maximum, entirely for an entire agonizing year. And she? Exactly what has she highly pathetically do? Highly pathetically plan absolutely some highly boring dinners? Her absolute greatest highly massive stress is highly pathetically actively choosing the highly expensive furniture entirely for the highly boring nursery. You highly desperately needed a highly true massive break completely with absolutely someone who highly profoundly understands your highly elite world. Her highly toxic words were exactly like a highly comforting, toxic balm, completely for his highly pathetic conscience. Evelyn was incredibly smart, highly ambitious, and highly successfully made him profoundly feel exactly like the highly arrogant king he highly genuinely believed completely himself, entirely, to absolutely be. Isabella, highly especially completely during the beautiful pregnancy, had violently become completely different, significantly softer, significantly more highly focused completely on the innocent baby, significantly less completely on him and his highly massive empire. It was incredibly boring. I completely know, he stated. It is absolutely just that it is highly incredibly terrible timing. There is absolutely never, ever a highly perfect, flawless time, she stated incredibly softly, her toxic voice smoothly dropping directly to a highly conspiratorial, toxic whisper. Isn't it highly officially time that you completely stop profoundly feeling highly pathetically guilty? You and I are officially the absolute truth. She is absolutely just a highly pathetic obligation. A highly beautiful and incredibly expensive pathetic obligation that you have absolutely already completely outgrown. This was officially the highly toxic narrative that Evelyn had absolutely been highly maliciously spinning entirely for agonizing months. She absolutely wasn't entirely just a highly pathetic mistress. She was officially his highly elite intellectual and highly spiritual partner. She had highly strategically positioned completely herself exactly as his highly elite savior. The absolute only highly brilliant one who truly, genuinely understood the highly massive burdens entirely of his highly massive genius. She had highly meticulously orchestrated exactly this highly secret trip, highly toxically convincing him that it was completely, utterly necessary. She had absolutely even highly successfully been the exact toxic one who highly subtly, highly maliciously suggested that he highly explicitly tell Isabella that he was highly actively going directly to freezing Boston, a highly boring place that actively sounded significantly more exactly like highly exhausting work and significantly less exactly like highly illicit pleasure. And she had absolutely been the exact toxic one who highly proudly posted the highly damning Instagram story. It was a highly calculated, massive risk. She profoundly knew that the highly elite world entirely of Alexander was completely, hermetically sealed. He highly arrogantly assumed that absolutely no one, entirely in his highly exclusive circle, entirely in massive Manhattan, would absolutely be highly suspiciously intensely watching the highly public social media entirely of his highly pathetic assistant. But Evelyn profoundly knew significantly better. In the highly advanced digital age, perfectly, there were absolutely no highly secret secrets. She had vividly seen the highly suspicious way that the loyal sister entirely of Isabella intensely looked directly at her. The highly undisguised, toxic suspicion. She highly confidently counted completely on Chloe entirely to highly actively be her highly involuntary, pathetic messenger. Evelyn absolutely no longer highly fiercely wanted to actively be a highly pathetic secret. She highly desperately wanted to absolutely be the highly anticipated next Mrs. Vance. Exactly this was officially her highly ultimate power move. I highly probably, absolutely should, highly urgently call, Alexander stated, confidently stepping completely out entirely of the highly exclusive pool and highly frantically searching entirely for his expensive phone. He vividly saw the highly massive series entirely of highly frantic missed calls and highly urgent text messages completely from Chloe. A highly freezing shiver entirely of absolute panic violently ran completely through him. He highly rapidly opened the absolute, last highly urgent exactly one. "Where exactly the hell absolutely are you?" he violently muttered. "What exactly is highly actively wrong?" Evelyn highly falsely asked, highly toxically pretending highly pure concern. "Isabella is highly actively, entirely in highly active labor. Chloe has absolutely been highly frantically actively texting me entirely for agonizing hours." He aggressively began to highly frantically pace the highly exclusive pool terrace, his brilliant mind highly frantically racing. "Why exactly didn't I highly successfully receive exactly this significantly sooner? The highly expensive Wi-Fi service right perfectly here is incredibly terrible. Do you deeply remember?" Evelyn stated incredibly softly. Absolutely already highly actively, having highly flawlessly anticipated exactly this. "You highly explicitly said it completely yourself." He highly rapidly typed a highly frantic response, his massive hands violently trembling incredibly slightly. He absolutely could not highly safely return completely to massive Manhattan completely with a highly deep, highly obvious Cabo tan. He highly desperately needed to flawlessly maintain the highly toxic lie. "I literally just highly safely landed. My expensive phone was completely turned entirely off, entirely in highly important corporate meetings. The absolute entire massive day." Exactly. This is completely incredible massive news. Exactly how is she? Is the innocent baby absolutely already perfectly here? I am actively, completely on my absolute way, directly to the massive airport. Right exactly now. Highly explicitly, tell Bella that I fiercely love her, and that I am actively confidently coming. He highly aggressively pressed send. The highly toxic lie flawlessly flowing completely from him, completely with highly terrifying ease. He smoothly turned completely toward Evelyn. "I absolutely have to highly rapidly leave. The expensive jet highly desperately needs to absolutely be highly rapidly refueled. I highly desperately need a highly official flight plan, completely back directly to massive Manhattan, but completely with a highly sudden layover. Absolutely first. Entirely in absolutely somewhere incredibly cold. Aspen," Evelyn highly smoothly suggested, a highly astute, toxic smile perfectly on her soft lips. "You could highly easily explicitly say that the highly important meeting entirely in freezing Boston violently dragged completely on, and you highly urgently had to highly rapidly detour completely through Aspen entirely for a highly secret, secondary, massive deal. Absolutely no one highly successfully tans entirely in freezing Aspen." Monty intensely looked directly cowardly at her. A highly slow, toxic smile beautifully spread completely across his handsome face. "My absolute God, you are completely, utterly brilliant." He highly intimately pulled her significantly closer and highly passionately kissed her incredibly hard. "Highly rapidly pack your expensive things. We will highly rapidly, safely drop you completely off, entirely in massive Miami, completely on the highly rapid way. I highly desperately need you completely back, entirely in the massive office, highly successfully holding the massive fort completely down. Completely, violently delete absolutely everything, absolutely all the highly damning photos, the highly expensive hotel reservations completely from your highly personal cards, absolutely everything. Do absolutely not highly actively worry," Evelyn stated, her piercing eyes brilliantly shining completely with highly toxic triumph. "By the absolute time you highly safely land, It will absolutely be exactly as if highly exclusive Cabo absolutely never, ever actively existed. While Alexander highly frantically aggressively rushed entirely to highly meticulously cover his highly toxic tracks, highly arrogantly convinced that he was absolutely still exactly one massive step completely ahead. He successfully possessed absolutely zero microscopic idea that entirely on the absolute other, highly distant side, entirely, of the massive world, a highly elite team entirely of highly ruthless forensic accountants, highly expensively hired, completely by Victoria Hastings, was absolutely already highly successfully uncovering the highly complex web entirely of highly secure shell companies and highly illegal offshore accounts that he highly illegally used entirely to highly securely hide his highly expensive personal expenses flawlessly, including the highly massive, five-figure absolute cost entirely of the highly exclusive Cabo Villa. Highly illegally paid absolutely not exactly as a highly personal expense, but highly illegally exactly as a highly fake corporate retreat entirely for Vance Tech. The highly massive trap was actively being highly meticulously set. The highly terrifying shark was actively, violently circling, and the highly arrogant prey was highly blindly swimming, highly, directly, completely, straight, directly into her highly massive, lethal jaws. Alexander thinks his alibi of going to Aspen is perfect. What would you say to him when he finally lands? Tell us below. Part 4. The Downfall of the King. The highly massive Gulf Stream smoothly descended completely through the highly thick clouds, perfectly over massive Manhattan. The highly familiar, beautiful skyline, entirely of the massive city, beautifully rising entirely to highly warmly greet him. Alexander Vance highly meticulously adjusted his highly expensive tie and highly smoothly ran exactly one massive hand completely through his dark hair. He profoundly felt a highly sudden pang entirely of highly genuine, pure emotion. He was actively going to absolutely be a true father. He highly beautifully imagined completely himself, confidently entering the highly sterile hospital room. Highly expensive flowers entirely. In massive hand, completely full. Entirely of highly pathetic apologies, entirely for the highly inevitable, highly momentous corporate business, entirely in freezing Boston. Isabella would absolutely be incredibly tired, but she would highly generously forgive him. She absolutely always highly pathetically did. He would highly lovingly hug his biological son entirely for the absolute first highly magical time. And exactly this absolute entire highly toxic Cabo mess would absolutely be completely, permanently forgotten. A highly secret, toxic secret, highly securely kept completely between him and Evelyn. He had highly agonizingly spent exactly 2 agonizing hours perfectly on the highly freezing tarmac entirely in Aspen, actively making a highly massive series entirely of highly frantic, backdated, highly important business calls entirely to highly successfully sell the highly toxic lie. He had absolutely even highly pathetically bought a highly cheap, pathetic Aspen snow globe completely from the highly busy airport, exactly as a highly pathetic prop. He was completely, utterly ready. His highly toxic story was completely, flawlessly impeccable as the expensive jet smoothly taxied directly toward the highly exclusive private hangar entirely in the highly elite Teterboro Airport. He vividly saw a highly sleek black Escalade highly patiently waiting perfectly on the highly secure tarmac. Good. His elite driver was completely ready. Perfectly here. Absolutely everything was highly flawlessly, actively going completely exactly according completely to his highly meticulous plan. The heavy door. The heavy door, entirely of the expensive jet, smoothly opened, and the highly crisp, cold air, entirely of massive Manhattan, violently hit him. He took a massive, incredibly deep breath, smoothly slipping completely into the highly familiar role entirely of the highly devoted, perfect husband, confidently returning completely home, directly to his beautiful family. He gracefully descended the highly steep steps, completely with his highly expensive leather carry-on securely in his massive hand. But highly exactly upon successfully reaching the absolute bottom, it absolutely was not his highly familiar, regular elite driver, who confidently stepped completely out entirely of the massive escalade. It was officially a highly terrifying woman, whom he absolutely did not vividly recognize. Flawlessly dressed entirely in a highly impeccably cut, severe gray power suit. Her highly distinguished silver hair flawlessly pulled completely back, entirely into a highly severe, elegant bob. Her beautiful expression was completely, utterly devoid, entirely of absolutely any highly pathetic emotion. Directly behind her, exactly two highly massive, imposing men, completely with highly stone-cold faces and highly dark, severe suits confidently emerged completely from the expensive vehicle. "Alexander Vance?" the highly terrifying woman asked. Her deep voice was incredibly quiet, but it completely, violently cut the highly freezing air exactly like a highly sharp fragment, entirely of highly lethal glass. "Yes," Alexander stated, completely, utterly confused. "Who exactly absolutely are you?" He intensely looked completely past her, highly desperately actively expecting his highly familiar elite driver, Francisco, to highly suddenly miraculously appear. "My highly official name is officially Victoria Hastings," she stated, her piercing eyes completely, violently locking completely onto his. "I am officially the highly elite lawyer entirely of your highly devoted wife." The highly heavy words violently struck Alexander exactly like a highly brutal physical blow. Lawyer entirely of his highly devoted wife? The highly absurd phrase absolutely made zero highly logical sense. Why exactly would Isabella highly possibly successfully possess an elite lawyer? An elite lawyer exactly like Victoria Hastings, whose highly terrifying name he intimately knew completely from the highly exclusive gossip pages. Absolutely always highly prominently linked, completely to the absolute most highly brutal, highly public corporate, and highly matrimonial legal battles entirely in the massive city. I absolutely do not completely understand," he violently stammered. His highly carefully, meticulously constructed toxic composure actively beginning to completely, violently crumble. "I highly genuinely believe that you highly actively do," Hastings stated, highly freezing coldly. She highly smoothly gave a highly slight, imperceptible nod, completely to exactly one entirely of her highly imposing men. The massive man confidently stepped completely forward and highly abruptly handed Alexander a highly thick, heavy manila envelope. Alexander intensely stared completely directly at it, his massive hand completely, violently frozen entirely in the freezing air. "What exactly is exactly this?" "Exactly. That is officially a highly official summons and highly brutal demand entirely for highly absolute divorce," Victoria stated, her deep voice completely, utterly monotonous. "On the highly explicit grounds entirely of highly toxic adultery, completely among highly numerous, completely other, highly illegal things. It absolutely also flawlessly contains a highly strict temporary restraining order that highly legally prevents you completely from highly actively accessing or highly illegally transferring absolutely any highly massive matrimonial assets, and a highly strict judicial order that highly legally prohibits you highly absolute access directly to the highly massive luxury penthouse perfectly on Park Avenue. You absolutely must not confidently go completely home, Mr. Vance, and you absolutely must not highly actively contact my highly elite client entirely in absolutely any highly possible manner. The brilliant mind entirely of Alexander violently spun completely out of control. Adultery, restraining order. How? Exactly how could she highly possibly profoundly know? It was completely, medically impossible. He had highly meticulously covered his highly toxic tracks. Evelyn had completely, violently deleted absolutely everything. "Exactly! This is completely insane!" he loudly sputtered, finally, highly miraculously finding his deep voice. "Perfectly, there has absolutely been a highly massive mistake. My highly devoted wife literally just miraculously had a beautiful baby. I was highly actively, entirely, in freezing Boston, entirely on highly important corporate business. I can highly easily prove it." He highly pathetically made a highly vague, pathetic gesture, completely with the massive hand that highly desperately held the highly cheap, pathetic Aspen snow globe. Victoria Hastings highly generously permitted completely herself a highly small, highly freezing toxic smile. It absolutely did not successfully reach her piercing eyes. "Ah, yes, freezing Boston. And I highly accurately assumed the highly sudden layover entirely in freezing Aspen was entirely for the highly exclusive Polar Bear Convention." She confidently took absolutely another massive step, significantly closer, violently lowering her deep voice entirely so exactly that absolutely only he could highly clearly hear her. "Highly generously permit me entirely to highly graciously save you the highly pathetic trouble entirely of highly illegally perjuring completely yourself absolutely any significantly further. We officially possess the highly strict flight logs entirely of your highly expensive private jet, directly to highly exclusive Cabo. We officially possess the highly expensive receipts completely from the Pedregal Resort, highly illegally charged directly to a highly secure shell company, exactly as a highly fake team-building exercise. And we officially possess a highly beautiful, high-definition screenshot entirely of the highly public Instagram story, entirely of Mrs. Thorne, flawlessly featuring your highly recognizable bare feet, highly happily enjoying the highly exclusive paradise that you highly arrogantly chose, completely over highly actively, attending the highly magical birth entirely of your absolute own biological son. Every single highly heavy word was a highly brutal hammer blow, systematically, completely violently, demolishing his highly fake, absolute reality. He physically felt the hot blood completely, violently drain entirely from his handsome face. He intensely looked completely past Hastings, his piercing eyes highly desperately frantic, searching the highly secure area. And exactly that was exactly when he vividly saw them, at the highly distant edge entirely of the highly exclusive private tarmac. Exactly just highly sufficiently, completely away entirely to absolutely be completely legal. Was officially a highly small, highly aggressive group entirely of highly aggressive photographers. Their highly long, expensive lenses were completely, violently, focused highly directly, completely on him. Exactly one entirely of them he highly flawlessly recognized. A highly notorious, ruthless paparazzi who brutally worked entirely for the highly prominent gossip pages, and confidently standing perfectly near them, intensely observing the highly explosive scene, completely with a highly terrifying expression entirely of highly cold, absolute satisfaction, was officially his highly loyal sister-in-law, Chloe. She highly proudly raised her expensive phone, exactly as if highly happily toasting him completely, before smoothly turning completely around. He had completely, blindly, fallen highly directly, straight directly into a highly perfectly, flawlessly executed ambush. You absolutely cannot highly actively do exactly this, he whispered incredibly softly, the heavy words actively sounding completely pathetic, absolutely even completely to his absolute own terrified ears. Isabella, she absolutely would not highly actively do exactly this. You have completely, fundamentally misunderstood the beautiful woman completely with whom you happily married. Mr. Vance, Hastings violently interrupted. You highly toxically thought she was absolutely just a highly pathetic decoration. You were completely, catastrophically wrong. She is officially the absolute queen, and you have absolutely been completely, violently expelled completely from the massive kingdom. The massive escalade will highly safely take you directly to a highly expensive hotel, entirely of your absolute own, highly pathetic choice. My highly imposing associate will highly aggressively accompany you entirely to highly meticulously ensure that you absolutely do, not highly actively do absolutely anything, highly incredibly foolish. A highly official copy entirely of exactly these highly complex documents has absolutely also been highly officially delivered directly to your highly elite board of directors, entirely in VanceTech. I highly accurately imagine that your massive day is actively about to completely, violently, get significantly, infinitely soon. She smoothly turned completely around, her highly brutal work completely done, and confidently returned directly to the massive escalade, completely without actively looking completely back. One entirely of the highly massive men smoothly opened the heavy rear door entirely for Alexander, his highly terrifying expression highly explicitly making it completely, unmistakably clear that exactly this, absolutely, was not a highly polite request, completely numb. Alexander smoothly slid completely into the highly expensive leather seat. The highly thick manila envelope physically felt exactly like it violently weighed exactly 100 massive kilograms. He incredibly slowly opened it, his massive hands violently trembling completely uncontrollably. The highly sterile legal jargon violently swam completely before his piercing eyes. But the highly bold words were completely, terrifyingly clear. Irreconcilable differences, extreme cruelty, adultery, highly securely attached, were officially the highly damning proofs. Exhibit A, a highly clear printout entirely of the highly strict flight log directly to Cabo. Exhibit B, a highly official copy entirely of the highly expensive hotel invoice. Exhibit C, a highly sharp, full-color photograph entirely of the bare feet. Entirely of him and Evelyn, perfectly in the highly exclusive infinity pool. The highly toxic word, paradise, highly maliciously mocking him completely from the absolute bottom, entirely, of the highly damning page. The expensive car smoothly drove completely away, completely from the highly exclusive hangar, ruthlessly leaving his highly expensive private jet, perfectly on the freezing tarmac, exactly like a highly massive monument, completely to his highly catastrophic stupidity. As they confidently headed directly to the highly busy highway, his expensive phone aggressively began to violently vibrate, completely uncontrollably. The bright screen brilliantly lit completely up, completely with highly urgent notifications. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Vanity Fair. The highly massive headlines were completely, utterly brutal. Highly arrogant tech mogul Alexander Vance highly publicly receives highly brutal divorce papers perfectly on airport tarmac, entirely amid highly explosive cheating allegations. Elite CEO entirely of Vance Tech, entirely in highly massive trouble, completely, after highly ruthlessly skipping the highly magical birth entirely of his biological son, entirely for a highly secret, tropical getaway, completely with his 26-year-old assistant. Inside the highly brutal divorce, a highly toxic story, entirely of massive lies, elite luxury, and highly brutal betrayal. He had highly proudly flown completely home, highly toxically, thinking he was the highly arrogant king, confidently returning directly to his massive castle. But the highly secure locks had absolutely been completely, violently changed. The highly massive drawbridge was completely up, and his highly arrogant kingdom was completely, violently on pure fire. He absolutely was not a highly powerful king. He was absolutely just a highly pathetic man, peacefully sitting entirely in the absolute back, entirely of a highly quiet car, completely with a highly cheap, pathetic Aspen snow globe. Finally, completely irrevocably, violently trapped. Alexander is ruined. Do you think losing his company is fair punishment for missing his son's birth for a mistress? Let us know below. Part 5. The Ascension of the Queen. The highly catastrophic consequences were completely immediate and absolutely devastating. The highly explosive stories, highly strategically fueled completely by the highly anonymous, but incredibly well-placed, toxic leaks entirely of Chloe, and the highly terrifying, strategic precision entirely of Victoria Hastings, flawlessly created a highly massive media storm that Alexander Vance absolutely could not highly possibly successfully control. The highly dramatic narrative was way too incredibly highly compelling. The highly arrogant multi-billionaire magnate, the highly beautiful, heavily pregnant wife entirely in highly excruciating labor, the highly illicit, tropical romantic encounter completely with the highly glamorous young assistant. It was an absolute, highly toxic morality play, entirely for the highly advanced modern age. And Alexander was perfectly, flawlessly cast, exactly as the highly irredeemable, toxic villain, the highly elite board of directors entirely of Vance Tech. A highly terrifying collection entirely of highly serious-faced massive men and beautiful women who fiercely cared significantly, more entirely about massive profits than highly pretty heavy words. Highly urgently convened an absolute emergency meeting. The highly toxic scandal absolutely wasn't entirely just a highly personal embarrassment. It was a highly direct, lethal threat completely to the highly pristine image entirely of the massive company. Victoria Hastings had highly aggressively ensured that they completely, profoundly, knew that the highly secret trip directly to Cabo was highly illegally paid, completely, with highly secure corporate funds, highly maliciously disguised, exactly as highly legitimate business expenses. Exactly this highly illegal act, entirely of massive embezzlement, flawlessly combined, completely with the highly terrifying public relations nightmare, was an absolute, highly undeniable breach entirely of his highly strict fiduciary duty. The highly valuable share price entirely of Vance Tech violently plummeted exactly 20%, entirely in exactly 2 short days. Before the highly agonizing week completely ended, Alexander Vance was completely, violently, forced entirely to highly humiliatingly take an absolute, indefinite leave, entirely of absolute absence, completely from the massive company that he had highly proudly built. He was completely, violently locked completely, entirely of his absolute own massive empire. Evelyn Thorne completely, permanently disappeared. Highly unceremoniously, violently, fired completely from her highly coveted position, and highly publicly named entirely in the highly brutal divorce proceedings. She completely, violently became a highly toxic pariah. Her highly massive dream entirely of miraculously becoming the highly anticipated. Next, Mrs. Vance had completely, violently vaporized. She had highly arrogantly lit the highly dangerous match, highly desperately expecting entirely to highly warmly warm, completely herself, completely with the massive fire. But highly toxically instead, she had absolutely been completely, violently, consumed completely by the highly lethal inferno. She completely deactivated her highly public social media and highly cowardly vanished. Her exactly 15 short minutes entirely of highly toxic infamy, completely, permanently over. Alexander, highly pathetically barricaded, entirely in a highly expensive suite, entirely in the Plaza Hotel, highly frantically attempted to highly aggressively fight, completely back. He highly expensively hired a highly elite team, entirely of highly equally ruthless, terrifying lawyers. They highly aggressively attempted entirely to highly maliciously paint Isabella exactly as a highly vengeful gold digger. But the highly toxic strategy completely catastrophically backfired highly spectacularly. Victoria Hastings was absolutely always exactly one massive step completely ahead. The highly complex case highly heavily depended completely on their highly strict prenuptial agreement, which was highly widely considered completely, utterly unbreakable. It highly legally guaranteed Isabella a highly generous, massive settlement, but absolutely not exactly one that would completely, violently alter his massive kingdom. But Victoria had highly miraculously successfully found the highly microscopic legal loophole, a highly little-known, highly strict fidelity clause that the absolute own highly arrogant elite lawyers entirely of Alexander had highly carelessly included, highly purely out, entirely of highly boring habit. It highly strictly explicitly stated that entirely in highly absolute case, entirely of highly proven adultery, that highly successfully led completely to a highly public scandal and violently damaged the highly pristine reputation entirely of the massive family, the highly strict financial limitations entirely of the highly complex prenuptial agreement would absolutely be completely null and absolutely void. Alexander had highly arrogantly signed exactly it completely without a single second thought, absolutely never, ever, genuinely believing that he could highly possibly absolutely ever be highly pathetically caught so incredibly, highly blatantly. It was the absolute ultimate highly lethal Trojan horse. His absolute own highly toxic arrogance was officially the highly lethal weapon that would completely, violently bring him completely down, faced completely with a highly public, highly protracted, and incredibly humiliating massive trial, entirely of which he was completely, 100% absolutely sure, entirely, to highly catastrophically lose. Alexander was completely, violently, forced entirely to highly desperately settle. It was officially exactly one entirely of the absolute largest, massive divorce settlements, entirely in the highly elite history, entirely of massive New York. Isabella Sterling absolutely was no longer absolutely just the highly pathetic wife, entirely of a highly arrogant millionaire. She was officially, completely in her absolute own highly legal right. An exceptionally highly wealthy, beautiful woman. But Isabella fiercely cared incredibly, little entirely, about the massive money entirely in itself. For her, it was completely entirely about absolute justice. It was entirely about highly absolute security, entirely for her innocent son. While the highly brutal legal battle highly violently raged entirely in the highly strict federal courts and highly sterile boardrooms. Her beautiful world had miraculously become incredibly small and beautifully, wonderfully focused. Her highly massive universe was officially the highly peaceful tranquility entirely of the highly massive penthouse that the federal court had highly legally granted her, and the highly sweet, beautiful aroma entirely of the highly soft skin entirely of her innocent baby. It was officially the highly gentle, soft weight entirely of little Leo, peacefully sleeping completely on her fragile chest. His incredibly tiny fingers, highly tightly curled, completely around absolutely hers. She highly beautifully learned the highly complex rhythm entirely of his highly demanding needs, the highly intricate language entirely of his highly different cries. She miraculously found a highly absolute strength she absolutely never, ever completely knew she highly successfully possessed. A highly deep, massive well, entirely of pure resilience and absolute love, that had highly peacefully remained completely untouched, completely during her agonizing years, exactly as the highly pathetic wife, entirely of Alexander. Her loyal sister Chloe was a highly constant, beautiful presence, a highly devoted, loving aunt, who highly visibly delighted entirely in actively making little Leo loudly laugh. The highly heavy silence entirely of the luxury penthouse was absolutely no longer highly oppressive. It was completely, utterly peaceful. The highly breathtaking view entirely of massive Central Park was absolutely no longer a highly toxic symbol entirely of highly pathetic isolation. It was a highly beautiful promise entirely of highly sunny walks completely under the bright sun, of a highly massive future that she would highly successfully build entirely by completely herself, completely on her absolute own highly strict terms. Exactly 6 agonizing months, completely after exactly that highly fateful explosive day, entirely in the highly exclusive airport. Isabella sat peacefully, entirely, on the highly exact same designer sofa, exactly where her highly toxic old life had completely, permanently ended. Flawlessly dressed, absolutely, not entirely in highly expensive designer evening wear, but entirely in incredibly comfortable, soft cashmere. Leo peacefully slept highly profoundly, entirely in his highly expensive bassinet, perfectly by her soft side, on the highly polished marble coffee table, perfectly in front, entirely of her. There, absolutely, was not a highly massive pile entirely of highly exclusive invitations directly to highly elite social galas, but a highly complex, massive business proposal, highly strategically utilizing a highly massive portion entirely of the highly massive settlement. She was highly aggressively actively establishing a highly massive foundation. The Sterling Foundation would absolutely be highly meticulously dedicated entirely to highly generously providing highly elite legal assistance and highly massive financial support completely to highly vulnerable women and innocent children, highly toxically victimized completely by highly powerful, arrogant men. Beautiful women who absolutely did not successfully possess a highly terrifying Victoria Hastings entirely to highly urgently call, or the highly massive resources entirely to highly aggressively fight completely back. It was a highly brand new, absolute purpose, violently forged, completely out entirely of her massive pain. Her expensive phone violently buzzed. It was officially a highly urgent news alert. Alexander Vance had highly quietly sold his highly massive remaining shares entirely in Vance Tech, and absolutely according completely to highly elite reports, was highly actively relocating directly to highly exclusive Dubai. A highly distant place, completely without highly strict extradition treaties, and a highly massive tolerance entirely for highly disgraced fallen titans. He was officially a highly pathetic ghost, a highly toxic whispered warning entirely at highly elite cocktail parties. Isabella intensely looked directly at the highly massive headline, and then highly casually dismissed the highly urgent notification completely without a single second thought. He was officially a highly closed chapter entirely of her beautiful life that was exactly now completely, permanently closed. She intensely looked directly at her innocent son, then completely back directly at the highly complex proposal entirely in her soft hands. The bright sun beautifully entered completely through the highly massive windows, beautifully bathing the massive room completely with a highly warm golden light. For the absolute first time, completely in a highly incredibly long massive time, Isabella Sterling profoundly felt truly, genuinely, completely free. She had completely, violently lost a highly toxic husband, but she had miraculously found completely herself, and her absolute own highly massive, beautiful ascension was absolutely only highly actively beginning. Epilogue. The Queen's Reign. Exactly 4 beautiful years completely later, the highly beautiful name entirely of Isabella Sterling was absolutely no longer highly synonymous, completely with highly toxic scandal, but completely with absolute power. Absolutely not. The highly borrowed, highly pathetic reflected power entirely of the highly submissive wife, entirely of a highly arrogant millionaire, but a highly genuine, highly hard-won, absolute influence that she highly expertly wielded completely with beautiful grace and highly absolute precision. The Sterling Foundation had miraculously become a highly formidable, massive force, entirely in the highly elite philanthropy entirely of massive Manhattan, a highly safe sanctuary, and a highly sharp sword entirely for beautiful women highly bravely navigating the highly dangerous toxic intersection entirely of highly brutal domestic strife and highly massive financial disparity. Isabella was absolutely no longer a highly pathetic footnote entirely of highly elite society. She was officially a highly prominent, massive figure entirely in Forbes, highly publicly celebrated entirely for her highly strategic, brilliant acumen and her completely unshakable, pure commitment. The highly massive luxury penthouse perfectly on Park Avenue, exactly once her highly terrifying gilded cage, was exactly now officially her highly impenetrable fortress and highly advanced command center. Leo, exactly now a highly boisterous, incredibly bright 4-year-old young boy, completely with the highly warm, beautiful eyes entirely of his loving mother, and a highly stubborn, sharp chin that she highly privately honestly admitted, highly clearly, came completely from his arrogant father. He was officially the highly bright sun entirely in her massive universe. Her beautiful life was a highly happy, beautiful rhythm, entirely of safely dropping him completely off. Entirely at highly elite preschool, highly sunny afternoons, entirely in massive Central Park, and highly quiet, peaceful nights, completely filled entirely with highly colorful picture books and highly complex Lego creations that beautifully sprawled completely across the highly polished marble floors. He profoundly knew absolutely nothing entirely about highly exclusive Cabo, entirely about highly strict restraining orders, entirely from the highly arrogant man whose highly toxic DNA he officially shared. For little Leo, his beautiful world was completely, utterly complete. It highly happily consisted entirely of his loving mother, his highly devoted Aunt Chloe, and a highly beautiful circle entirely of highly caring, loyal friends. Alexander Vance absolutely was not a highly terrifying ghost, entirely in his highly safe home. He absolutely was not even a highly pathetic memory. One highly crisp, beautiful autumn afternoon, Isabella was peacefully entirely in the highly modern office, entirely of the massive foundation completely downtown. A highly sleek, beautiful space, agonizing light years, completely away, completely from the highly opulent, toxic sterility entirely of Vance Tech. She was highly deeply immersed entirely in a highly complex file. Exactly one, highly particularly nasty, toxic, exactly one, highly actively involving a highly arrogant real estate magnate, highly maliciously attempting entirely to highly toxically use his massive wealth entirely to completely, violently bankrupt his highly devoted wife, and exactly, thus highly ruthlessly take highly absolute custody entirely of her innocent children. It was a highly tragic story that Isabella highly profoundly understood entirely in the absolute deepest, highly resonant depths entirely of her fragile bones. Her highly efficient elite assistant highly urgently called her. Mrs. Sterling, Victoria Hastings is officially entirely on highly secure line 1. She highly explicitly says it is completely urgent. Isabella physically felt a highly familiar, terrifying tingle entirely of pure apprehension. Highly secure calls, completely from Victoria, were incredibly rare and absolutely never, ever highly trivial. She smoothly picked completely up the heavy receiver. Victoria, what exactly has violently happened? Isabella. The beautiful voice entirely of Victoria was exactly as incredibly calm and highly sharp, exactly as absolutely always. He has confidently returned. Isabella absolutely did not desperately need entirely to actively ask exactly who he absolutely was. A highly freezing, cold knot completely, violently formed entirely in her heavy stomach. A highly unwelcome, toxic echo entirely of a highly pathetic life that she had completely, permanently left perfectly behind. A highly incredibly long, massive time, completely ago. He has confidently returned exactly where? In massive Manhattan. He safely landed exactly this highly bright morning entirely in JFK. His highly expensive elite lawyers have absolutely already highly urgently contacted my highly exclusive office. He is highly aggressively petitioning the highly strict federal court entirely for highly official visitation rights. The highly toxic audacity was completely, utterly astounding. For exactly 4 agonizing years, Alexander had absolutely not highly successfully sent a single, highly pathetic birthday card. He had highly actively made absolutely zero highly pathetic attempt entirely to actively contact little Leo. Highly strictly adhering completely to the highly strict original divorce agreement that had highly legally granted Isabella highly absolute, exclusive legal and physical custody. Completely without highly mandatory, strict visits entirely for him. A highly massive concession that he had highly easily, cowardly made entirely in his highly desperate moment. Highly frantically desperate entirely to miraculously make the highly toxic scandal completely disappear. With exactly what highly pathetic arguments? Isabella sharply asked, her beautiful voice highly dangerously, terrifyingly low. The highly usual toxic garbage, Victoria stated completely with a heavy sigh. He highly toxically claims that he is officially a completely changed man. He has highly agonizingly spent the absolute last highly agonizing years highly deeply reflecting and highly actively rehabilitating his highly toxic character. He highly arrogantly says that he highly legally possesses the highly absolute right entirely to successfully meet his biological son. His highly expensive lawyers are highly desperately actively attempting entirely to highly maliciously frame our highly strict original agreement exactly as absolutely something entirely to which he was highly illegally coerced, entirely in a highly desperate moment, entirely of highly extreme, toxic duress. Coercion that he highly maliciously provoked completely completely by his absolute own highly toxic self. Isabella violently fumed, the white-hot anger violently burning incredibly fast and highly hot. I highly accurately assume his highly massive corporate businesses entirely in highly exclusive Dubai absolutely did not highly successfully actively work completely out. My highly elite sources highly explicitly say that he highly foolishly squandered the absolute vast majority entirely of his highly massive capital, highly desperately attempting entirely to highly aggressively launch a highly massive new tech startup that completely, spectacularly failed, Victoria firmly confirmed. He absolutely is not completely in highly pathetic bankruptcy. Absolutely not completely by a highly long, massive shot. But he is absolutely no longer entirely in the highly exclusive stratosphere entirely of Vance Tech. He is officially a highly diminished, pathetic man. And highly diminished, pathetic men highly frequently, intensely look completely directly to the highly toxic past, entirely to highly miraculously recover a highly pathetic sense entirely of absolute power. He is absolutely not actively going to highly successfully get exactly it completely from me, nor completely from my innocent son, Isabella stated, her absolute determination completely, violently hardening exactly like solid steel. Fiercely fight him, Victoria. Highly aggressively use absolutely everything that we highly successfully possess. Absolutely, of course, Victoria stated. But Isabella, he is actively going to highly desperately attempt entirely to highly publicly take exactly this directly to the highly aggressive media. The highly desperate, pathetic plea entirely of a highly loving father. He will highly maliciously attempt entirely to highly toxically paint you exactly as the highly freezing cold and highly vengeful, toxic woman who highly maliciously keeps an innocent son completely away, completely from his highly repentant, loving father. You absolutely must be highly meticulously prepared entirely for exactly that. The highly terrifying warning confidently came way too incredibly, catastrophically late. By the absolute time Isabella safely arrived completely home, exactly that highly specific night, the absolute first highly toxic volley had absolutely already been completely, violently fired. A highly anonymous source incredibly close, completely to Alexander Vance, had highly maliciously leaked a highly dramatic story directly to a highly prominent, sleazy tabloid. The highly massive headline was highly sickeningly, completely predictable, highly repentant elite magnate confidently returns directly to the United States entirely to fiercely fight, entirely for the innocent son he absolutely never, ever intimately knew. The highly toxic article was an absolute flawless masterpiece entirely of highly toxic manipulation. Completely full, entirely of highly fake quotes, entirely about the highly profound, massive regret, entirely of Alexander and his highly unconditional pure love, entirely for a highly innocent child, that he had absolutely only vividly seen entirely in highly unauthorized paparazzi photos. Chloe was highly anxiously waiting completely for her entirely in the luxury penthouse. Her beautiful face, an absolute violent storm. The highly toxic snake has highly cowardly crawled completely out entirely of his highly pathetic hiding hole. She violently spat, highly aggressively raising her advanced tablet, highly prominently showing the highly toxic article. How exactly dare he? It is officially a highly calculated tactic, Chloe. He is highly desperately attempting entirely to highly maliciously affect me, to highly aggressively force a highly violent reaction, Isabella stated, smoothly taking completely off her expensive coat. She confidently went directly to the massive window, intensely looking directly at the bright lights entirely of the massive city. She profoundly felt the highly familiar old rage, the highly familiar toxic sting entirely of massive betrayal. But exactly now, it was completely, utterly different. It was a highly controlled, massive burn. Absolutely not a highly chaotic wild forest fire. She absolutely was no longer the highly pathetic woman who completely, violently crumbled. She was officially the highly powerful woman who highly meticulously strategized. The highly agonizing following weeks were an absolutely grueling, massive war, entirely of absolute attrition, highly violently waged, completely through highly expensive lawyers and highly strategic press releases. Alexander gave a highly carefully, meticulously staged, highly exclusive interview, completely to a highly sympathetic, elite television journalist. His piercing eyes completely full, entirely, of highly practiced fake sincerity, exactly as he highly emotionally spoke entirely about his highly catastrophic mistakes and his highly desperate yearning entirely to absolutely be a true father. He visually looked significantly older, his handsome face significantly thinner, the highly signature toxic charisma exactly, now highly toxically tinged, completely with a highly desperate, pathetic edge. He absolutely never, ever highly explicitly attacked Isabella, highly directly, but highly maliciously painted her exactly as a highly understandably, deeply wounded beautiful woman, whom he highly desperately hoped would exactly one highly beautiful day miraculously find it entirely in her fragile heart, the highly beautiful way entirely to completely forgive him entirely for the absolute sake entirely of their innocent son. It was a highly brilliant, toxic performance. Public opinion, absolutely always incredibly fickle, aggressively began to highly dangerously fluctuate. Highly toxic online comments aggressively began to highly maliciously question exactly whether it was completely right, entirely, to highly maliciously keep an innocent son completely away, completely from his biological father, completely. Forever, highly, entirely, regardless entirely of the highly toxic past sins, entirely of the highly arrogant father. Isabella, highly strictly following the highly strict elite advice entirely of Victoria, safely remained completely, utterly silent. She absolutely did not highly generously give highly public interviews. She absolutely did not highly officially issue highly defensive statements. She highly gracefully continued her highly important work, was highly beautifully photographed, safely taking little Leo directly to the massive park, and highly flawlessly presented a highly impenetrable facade entirely of highly serene and completely unshockable absolute confidence. Her highly deafening silence was significantly more highly powerful than absolutely any highly defensive denial. It highly powerfully communicated that the highly pathetic, toxic drama entirely of Alexander Vance was completely, utterly beneath her. Alexander is back and playing the victim to get custody. What's your ultimate revenge strategy for Isabella? Let us know below. The final judgment. The absolute first highly anticipated court hearing was an absolute, highly chaotic circus. The highly aggressive news media highly aggressively swarmed the highly massive stairs entirely of the federal courthouse. Alexander confidently arrived flawlessly, wearing a highly sober, conservative suit, visually looking exactly like a highly pathetic man, highly actively willing, entirely, to highly publicly immolate, completely, himself. Isabella confidently arrived heavily flanked, completely by Victoria Hastings. Her beautiful expression completely indecipherable, her piercing gaze completely, violently fixed, completely straight directly ahead, inside the highly secure chambers entirely of the highly terrifying judge. The highly complex arguments were highly meticulously laid completely out. The highly expensive elite lawyers entirely of Alexander highly emotionally spoke entirely of the highly fundamental, absolute rights entirely of a biological father. Victoria Hastings highly eloquently spoke entirely of a highly arrogant father who had completely, violently abdicated absolutely those highly sacred rights, the absolute precise moment he confidently boarded a highly expensive private plane directly to highly exclusive Cabo. She highly sharply spoke entirely of exactly 4 agonizing years, entirely of highly complete and highly total absolute silence, of the highly complete lack entirely of absolutely any highly massive financial or highly emotional support, significantly beyond exactly what was highly strictly ordered, completely by the federal court. She highly masterfully painted a highly vivid picture, absolutely not entirely, of a highly repentant, loving father, but entirely of a highly catastrophic, failed businessman, highly desperately actively seeking a highly brand new, pathetic lifeline. A highly brand new, pathetic way entirely to miraculously return directly to the highly blinding public light. Highly maliciously using his biological son exactly as a highly pathetic pawn. Then, Victoria flawlessly played her absolute ultimate, highly lethal trump card. A highly terrifying ghost, completely from the highly toxic past entirely of Alexander, entirely of whom Isabella highly genuinely thought she would absolutely never, ever highly clearly hear completely again. Your Honor, Victoria stated, we would highly absolutely love entirely to highly officially present a highly sworn official affidavit completely from Mrs. Evelyn Thorne. A highly stunned, dead silence completely, violently, fell completely over the massive room. The handsome face entirely of Alexander completely, violently turned completely white. Victoria aggressively continued. Mrs. Thorne, who currently highly peacefully resides entirely in massive London, or Seville, completely under her highly official married name, has highly officially provided a highly detailed statement that highly meticulously details exactly how Mr. Vance highly aggressively pressured her entirely to highly legally sign a highly strict non-disclosure agreement, NDA, completely after their highly brutal breakup, highly illegally paying her a highly substantial, massive sum entirely so exactly that she would highly securely keep completely silent. Significantly more highly pertinently, it highly meticulously details highly numerous toxic conversations completely during their highly intimate time, completely together, entirely in which Mr. Vance highly toxically referred completely to his highly innocent unborn son, exactly as a highly annoying complication and a highly pathetic future obligation. He highly explicitly expressed absolute zero highly genuine interest entirely in the innocent child, significantly beyond the highly toxic heir he was highly officially expected entirely to highly pathetically produce. His highly secret trip directly to highly exclusive Cabo, she highly officially affirms, was highly specifically planned. Exactly as absolutely done. Last highly massive fling, completely before highly toxically tying. Completely himself, completely down. There was absolutely never, ever, absolutely any highly genuine intention entirely to safely return. Entirely for the highly magical birth, Victoria highly gently let the highly heavy words beautifully float completely in the heavy air. The highly sworn affidavit systematically, completely, violently, dismantled the highly fake, toxic narrative entirely of Alexander exactly as the highly sorrowful and completely repentant, true father. It completely, violently exposed him entirely for exactly what he truly, genuinely was. A highly terrifying narcissist whose absolute only highly genuine regret was highly pathetically actively being completely caught. The highly terrifying judge, a highly no-nonsense, severe woman entirely in her highly early 60s, highly meticulously read the highly damning affidavit. Her highly severe expression violently became significantly colder, completely, with absolutely every single highly damning page. She intensely looked directly at Alexander, a highly long, incredibly evaluative, piercing gaze. Mr. Vance, the highly terrifying judge stated, her deep voice heavily dripping completely with absolute disapproval. You completely, voluntarily renounced your highly fundamental right entirely to highly actively opine entirely on the beautiful life entirely of your biological son, exactly 4 agonizing years completely ago. Your highly recent, sudden return and highly sudden, pathetic interest physically feel significantly less exactly like highly genuine paternal concern, and significantly more exactly like a highly cheap, pathetic public relations stunt. The highly aggressive petition entirely for visitation is completely, utterly denied. My highly official advice entirely to you is that you safely return directly to the highly pathetic life that you have highly successfully built, entirely for completely yourself, and safely leave exactly this beautiful family completely, utterly, in absolute peace. It was completely, permanently over. The heavy gavel violently fell completely with a highly final, absolute, decisive blow. Alexander safely remained completely, utterly dazed. His handsome face a highly toxic mask entirely of absolute incredulity and pure fury. His highly manipulative play had completely, catastrophically failed. He had highly maliciously underestimated her. He had highly maliciously underestimated absolutely all entirely of them. Isabella and Victoria confidently exited the massive courthouse, perfectly among the highly blinding flash, entirely of the highly aggressive cameras. Isabella absolutely did not beautifully smile. She simply highly proudly kept her delicate head incredibly high and smoothly got completely into her expensive car. As she confidently drove completely away, she vividly saw him confidently step completely out. His handsome face completely, violently crumpled completely by absolute defeat. Heavily surrounded completely by highly aggressive reporters who loudly shouted highly intrusive questions that he absolutely could not highly possibly answer for a highly microscopic fraction entirely of a highly terrifying second. Their piercing eyes violently met entirely in the absolute middle entirely of the highly chaotic, massive scene. She absolutely did not vividly see highly pure remorse entirely in his piercing gaze. Absolutely. Only the highly bitter, toxic rage entirely of a highly arrogant king who had completely, violently lost his massive kingdom entirely for the absolute second and completely, final, massive time. That exact night, completely after safely putting little Leo directly to deep sleep, Isabella smoothly poured exactly 2 expensive glasses entirely of vintage wine and sat peacefully completely with Chloe perfectly on the highly expansive terrace, perfectly overlooking the massive park. To highly absolute victory, Chloe stated, highly proudly raising her expensive glass, and completely to Evelyn Thorne, who profoundly knew she would highly ultimately, completely end. Completely up actively being our highly absolute, secret weapon. Isabella beautifully smiled. A highly genuine, incredibly tired, beautiful smile. Highly toxic people highly miraculously change Chloe. Or perhaps they simply highly eventually completely tire entirely of the highly exhausting lies. She highly smoothly took a highly small sip entirely of the expensive wine. The highly cold liquid, a highly soothing, beautiful balm. He is completely, permanently gone, completely forever. Exactly this highly specific time. What exactly do you genuinely think he will highly actively do exactly now? Isabella intensely looked completely out directly at the highly infinite, massive sea entirely of bright city lights. At the massive empire entirely of freezing glass and solid steel. It was a massive city that had absolutely been highly officially witness completely to her highly brutal fall and her highly spectacular, massive rise. I honestly do not completely know, she stated completely honestly, and entirely for the absolute first time. I highly genuinely, truly absolutely do not fiercely care. She had highly bravely faced the highly terrifying ghost entirely of her highly toxic past, and she absolutely had not violently blinked. She had fiercely protected her innocent son. She had highly aggressively defended her absolute peace. The highly toxic echoes entirely of Alexander Vance were finally completely, beautifully, fading completely away, flawlessly replaced completely by the highly beautiful sounds entirely of her absolute own highly beautiful life. The highly soft, productive hum entirely of her massive foundation, highly actively doing its highly critical work. The highly distant, pure laughter completely from the beautiful room entirely of her innocent son, and the highly steady, completely secure beating entirely of her absolute own, fragile heart. Her highly massive ascension was completely, utterly complete. She was completely, perfectly home. What an absolutely incredible, breathtaking ending to a highly explosive story. Do you fiercely think Isabella did the absolute right thing by permanently banning Alexander from his son's life? Was his ultimate downfall completely deserved? Drop your fierce thoughts in the comments below. Please don't forget to smash that like button, share this empowering story of strength, and subscribe to our channel for more explosive, life-changing stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.